Welcome to CBJ in 30, presented by Pedialyte. I'm Bob McElligott. Today, you're going to hear from Elliotte Friedman from the 32 Thoughts podcast. We're going to talk Blue Jackets and a lot of other things. But first, I want to get you caught up to date since last we met about some business the Blue Jackets have done. The Blue Jackets extended two players to new contracts, a one-year deal and a two-year deal. Who gets the one-year deal? It's forward Zach Aston Reese. Now, Zach Aston Reese wasn't even a member of the Blue Jackets until after training camp was over. He was in camp with the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Blue Jackets took him off waivers when the Golden Knights were trying to send him to the American Hockey League. Zach has come in here. He has played extremely well, and he was rewarded with a one-year contract extension, and Zach is extremely appreciative.
If you go back all the way to the summer, I never thought I would be in Columbus. And signing an extension, last thing that was on my mind. So, it feels good to have earned it. I know a lot of the guys were excited. Coaching staff was happy for me. So that feels good. I've always believed in myself, but it's nice to have everyone else believe in you as well.
The other extension the Blue Jackets made was to defenseman Jake Christensen. He got a two-year deal. Jake is a guy that was signed as a non-drafted free agent and has just worked his way through the Blue Jackets system until he gets this opportunity. He says it's something that wasn't really on his mind, but he's sure glad he has the deal.
It wasn't something that was on my mind until it was, and then I wanted to get it off pretty quickly there so that I could just focus on playing and trying to help the team win and keep building towards the collective goal here.
So once again, congratulations to Zach Aston Reese and Jake Christensen for earning new deals through the good work they've done here with the Blue Jackets. Well, when the Blue Jackets were on their recent road trip, one of the stops was in Toronto. And while we were there, Elliotte Friedman from the 32 Thoughts podcast and Rogers Sportsnet, and he's part of Hockey Night in Canada, he came in to talk with Zach Werenski for the podcast. He was kind enough afterwards to sit down with me so that we could talk Blue Jackets and much more. Well, Elliotte, I know the Blue Jackets are really playing well and garnering attention.
Yes.
When you're coming in to talk to Zach Werenski for 32 Thoughts. But on a serious note, though, as an observer from the outside, how impressed have you been with what they've been able to do so far?
I think everybody's incredibly impressed. And I think the other thing, too, is that, I'm a guy, I'm Canadian, I work for Hockey Night in Canada, and, we want all the Canadian teams to make the playoffs. And you look at Columbus right now, they're in there with Boston, and there's two Canadian teams there, Ottawa and Montreal. And of course, I want Ottawa and Montreal to do well, but whenever I watch Columbus, I'm thinking I can't root against this team. I think that the way they've played this year has gained them a ton of respect. I think people are cheering for them, and like I said, I think it's really hard to root against the Blue Jackets. The charge they've made in this particular season.
Is it even more surprising to you that, look, Johnny Gaudreau, that tragedy happens before training camp, so you lose your best player. Patrick Laine is another very talented offensive player who gets traded away. I mean, just in that scenario, it's not often a team loses two extremely good forwards and yet is continuing to compete and win the way this team has.
Well, that's 100% true, Bob. I think that's a big part of it. I think also just the Gaudreau tragedy, I think everybody would have understood if it took the Blue Jackets players a long time to mentally be able to play. And the other thing, too, is, and as you said, when you interviewed Werenski, was having a fantastic season. But also, look, Jenner got hurt, and Goodbranson got hurt, and that's a big part of your leadership group. And all this, I think everybody in Ohio, all the great Blue Jackets fans were hoping this was going to be Werenski's team. Well, it's really become Werenski's team. Like Monahan, very good too, but now he's out of the lineup. So now Zach Werenski got thrust into a position where he had to be the guy. Like there was no other option, and he's thriving on the ice and off. And I think this, like if the Blue Jackets make the playoffs, to me, I was watching some Coach of the Year polls recently, and I didn't see Dean Evison's name. Like, I don't know how he can't win it if they get in. And if Werenski keeps going the way he's going, I think it's really hard to win the Norris in this league with Cale Makar there and Quinn Hughes there. Like, Heiskanen from Dallas, I think he's one of the best defensemen in the league. It's tough for him to win. But like Werenski this year, if they make the playoffs, I got to think he's going to get a lot of Norris votes. I got to think he's going to get Hart votes. And that's the thing that stands out to me this year is that he's been phenomenal. Your young players have taken huge steps. Like, look, Johnson's better, Sillinger's better, the Russian players are better, Marchenko, everybody's finding out about how good a player he is, and Merzlikins and the goalies have given you enough to stay in it. Like, I think it's a real credit to the people as individuals and the whole organization as a group that you've played the way that you've played after everything that happened over the summer.
One of your biggest specialties as being an insider is to find out what's going on around the league, who might be available, and then figure out where it might be a fit for somebody else. When you look at this Blue Jackets team, how do you see that? Because they're having so much success with what they have. And you can take two approaches. You can say, well, don't want to touch it. We'll just leave it and see if these guys can get to where they want to go, and then let them do it as a group. Or you can add to it a little bit. Are there any guys around the league that might be available that you could see Don Waddell maybe saying, this guy could be a good fit here?
Well, I think the thing that I look at with him is if you're going to give up anything really important, you want somebody who could be a Blue Jacket for a long time, right? And, I think one of the things that happens is when you have young players who are playing successfully, you don't want to block them. So all of a sudden, I'm looking at all of your young players who are rising, and I'm not bringing anybody in here who is going to block these guys from playing. I mean, unless it's such a stud of a player that you have no other choice. Like, the thing is, I wonder, we've wondered about guys like Pettersson, if Vancouver actually does trade him, which I think is trending the other way right now. I mean, I think there would be a ton of teams that would look at a guy like that. But I always believe that the best way to solve your problems is internal. And, the other thing I know about Don Waddell is this is his first year as a manager of the Blue Jackets, right? He's getting to learn who all of these people are. And I think the one thing he really wanted more than anything else was, are we going to be playing meaningful games at the end of the season? Well, right now you are. And I would bet that his thing would be, I want to see, even if the Blue Jackets don't make the playoffs, I want to see who steps up when we're playing meaningful games at the end of the year. Who are the guys that tell us that they are the guys we're going to ride with for years? And that's what I think is probably the most important thing to him.
And Don really does have a track record, obviously, especially when you look at what he did in Carolina the last couple of years. Most of the bigger deals that he made, those were in the summertime.
Yep.
And he really likes to get active around the draft.
Yep.
And he will around the trade deadline if it's right, but in the summertime. And would you think that maybe that's where you might see a little bit more activity from a guy who, as you said, is just figuring out what he has, what is actually here, what do I have, what's going to work long term, and where might I be able to improve long term?
I think his biggest hope right now, the impression I get, is that he can see who can handle that pressure of important March hockey. I think, to me, that's probably even more than who might be available for trade or who might get traded out. It's who can handle the pressure when the games really matter. I look at your team right now, and I see a team that has earned the right to compete for the playoff spot. And, you were mentioning that Don was on the radio with you and Jody last week, and he said that, why would I trade a guy for a mid-round draft pick? And I've heard the same thing. And I understand that from him, because right now your team is indicating that it's earned the right to battle. And so that's the thing I would be concentrating on the most, is when we get in those games, who thrives? Because that's a player that we think will be a key part of the Blue Jackets when they really start to rise. And if I was in his shoes, that's what I'd be doing too. I'd want to see how my young guys handle all of that.
All right, now that being said, when you look at the potential unrestricted free agents coming up, you've got Ivan Provorov. Mm-hmm. That's not going to be a mid-round guy. That's a guy you might be able to get a first-round pick for. There's been a lot of talk about maybe he would be open to staying in Columbus. Now, of course, then you have to measure term.
You got to make a deal.
Right? You got to make a deal. And it's got to be the right deal on both sides, but especially for the team, as you said, because you don't want to block out anybody that might be coming too. So you don't want to get into too long-term of a deal or too much of an AAV when it comes to salary. Where do you see a guy like Ivan Provorov being on March 8th?
One of the things I learned about Waddell is that he's a good card player. The longer you've been around, he's been around a long time, you've kind of seen everything. You know what the landscape is going to look like. I would bet, as we sit here, he kind of knows what the market is for trade. He probably has a good idea what A, he's willing to offer Provorov, and B, Provorov expects in return, and is there a path there? I think deadline spur action, okay? Number one, does anybody sit up and say, I need Provorov, and I'm going to make an offer that says, that's like Godfather, right? I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. I think he's prepared to wait and see, A, how the team does, B, what the offers are, and C, what it'll really take to sign Provorov. And in these situations, sometimes you don't know until right before the trade deadline. Unless someone steps up early, sometimes you don't know until right at the end. Now, there's something a bit unique this year about, I think there are some teams that will try to get their moves done before the Four Nations. Now, Provorov's not playing in that, but so it might still be a situation where you can wait. But I know we love to talk about this every day, and we all do. It keeps me employed. But I see Don Waddell as a guy who's like, if this takes time and comes down to the wire, he's not going to be afraid of that. He's been through, 20 trade deadlines? He knows what this game is like.
Matthew Olivier is another guy the Blue Jackets have that a lot of teams covet, that kind of a player. He can fight, but he can play. He's having a career year right now. Don Waddell has said he's going to be here, but yet, to what you were just talking about with Provorov, there has not been a deal done yet when it comes to that. What are you hearing about Matthew Olivier? And especially in Canada, I know that you hear a lot of things about those teams that would like to be involved in having that type of player.
Well, I think there would be a lot of interest in him. The biggest challenge that the Blue Jackets have in this particular case is that his power to negotiate is probably never greater than it will be right now, right? So, and he's not a guy, and I don't say this negatively in any way. This is probably the biggest deal he's ever going to sign. So, it's important for him to take advantage of that. The one thing I really believe is he wants to stay, and the Blue Jackets want to keep him. So I always believe if there's a willingness there, that is where 95 times out of 100 where you're going to end up. So I don't have any reason to believe at this point in time that's going to be any different for Olivier. I've heard there's been contact. I've heard they've started talking. I didn't get the sense last I checked that there was anything close, but I know they're talking. And again, there's time. And I really believe deadline spur action. I think that a lot of times there's a lot of saber rattling, and then you get close, then everybody puts their true cards on the table and you get things done. I always think if the player wants to stay and the team wants them, much more often than not, it gets done. So I don't have any reason at this point in time to panic Blue Jackets fans or anything like that.
People in Montreal might not like that answer.
I'll tell you this, not only Montreal, there's about 30 teams that would love to have that guy. It's funny, like fighting's way down. We know a lot more about it, but intimidation still wins in sports. Like it still does. Toughness is not just fighting. Toughness is winning a puck battle. Toughness is knocking a guy off stride in the middle of a playoff series. Like toughness comes in a lot of different ways. And the other thing too is it's pretty clear that the players really like what Olivier brings. And Waddell's been around long enough to know how to value that.
All right, at this year's trade deadline, or maybe as you said, maybe it happens a little bit before, every year we get into the same things. Like, this is going to be the year there are going to be these blockbusters and there's going to be all these moves. And then, you guys are doing shows all day long.
Yeah.
And it's a trickle in of information. And it hasn't been the big blockbusters for the most part. Could it be this year?
I always want to say yes because I'm working them and I want to keep my optimism up. I'd say this. Some years nothing happens. Some years some things happen. The one thing with me is every year there's something that surprises me. I don't see coming. As you said, we call ourselves insiders. Someone once asked me, like, how much do you think you really know? What percentage of what's going on do you think you really know? And my answer was like 10. And they go, 10? Like, that seems really low. And I said, I think there's a lot of stuff that happens out there without us knowing about it. And I think, this year, like, there's been so much noise around teams like the Rangers and the Vancouver that I think teams really work hard to make sure this stuff doesn't get out because they know how much it can damage a room. So every year there's something that happens that I'm like, I did not see that coming. And so I always think there's going to be something. It makes me even more paranoid than I normally am, Bob. But every year I'm like, there's going to be something I don't see coming.
Hey, since you brought that up, can I ask you to take us behind the curtain for just a second and how you do your job? First of all, you've got to have trust of general managers and agents and your phone. How many do you go through? Just one phone a year, or I mean?
Yeah, I you know what? I know people have 2 different phones. Like I don't like that because that increase. Like someone once asked me, "Do you do 2 phones?" And I'm like, "No, I keep a spare brick around me, 2 of them actually to charge, and I have a cord." It's because I said I saw a piece on Adam Schefter where he has 2 phones. I would be I worry enough about sending the wrong message to a person. If I had 2 phones, like I have the attention span of a flea. I am not built to handle 2 phones. I would be sending wrong messages to wrong people all the time.
How often are people reaching out to you more so than you reaching out to them?
It goes both ways. There's a group of probably about 20 people that I talk to a lot, and a lot of my information goes from there. The thing that's really changed a lot, Bob, is whenever something happens, I really like to warn people. I like to say, hey, heads up, I'm hearing this. Social media has changed all that. Like, yeah, I've had people call me, like the other day with John Klingberg going to Edmonton. It was like someone said to me, Klingberg's going to Edmonton, and I was like, okay, I'm going to give a heads up, and I know, and they're like, no, don't, because it's going out. Like you're not, and that. I don't like that as much. I like to warn people if I can, but you can't always. Like that's the biggest change is that social media has made things so much faster, so much faster.
How much do you actually compete with the other guys that do the things that you do, the Pierre LeBruns, Chris Johnson, stuff like that? I mean, you're all doing the same type of thing. You're trying to get that information. You want to get it out. But yet you all know each other.
Yeah, we all know each other and we're all friendly. Like those guys are good guys, like all the other people who do, but we're competitive. It's like, it's funny. Like someone once said to me, like, who cares? And I'm like, it's like, do you want to do what you do well, right? So I think there's 2 things to it. Do you want to get it first? Yeah, but do you want to make sure you get it right? Yeah, because there's been times I've been wrong. And when you have to write out like a tweet or something saying, I screwed this up, like that sucks. So you want to get it first, but you want to get it right. And I know those guys. Those guys want to beat me, and I want to beat them. But I love them all as people. Like they're good people.
The teams that are at the top in their respective conferences and divisions, do you see some teams that pretty much have a lock on things right now?
I think the East is just weird. Like I still think Florida's the best team in the East, but you have to look at Washington and say they're the one that's been the most consistent this year. The West, like I think the East playoffs, especially with Columbus and all those teams battling, I think the East playoffs this year are going to be wide open. Like anything can happen there. But I look at the top of the West with Winnipeg, Colorado, Dallas, Edmonton, Vegas. I thought Vancouver would be a lot better this year. They haven't been. I think all the heavyweights are at the top of the West. Like that West is for people who are boxing fans. Like there was a time in the 60s and 70s where there was like 7 guys who could have been the heavyweight champions of the world. That's what that's like in the West. The East is more like there's a bunch of teams that maybe aren't heavyweights, but they're all equal. And you have no idea who's going to win. Like there's going to be some of these series are going to be impossible to predict because you're going to look at them and say, okay, who's better? I have no idea. Like in the West, it'll be like, oh my God, how do I pick wins between these 2 teams? In the East, it's going to be like, oh my God, how do I pick who's going to win between these 2 teams?
It's funny you say that because a couple of weeks ago, we were having a discussion about if the Blue Jackets were to make the playoffs and match up against Washington.
Yeah.
On paper, it's like, oh, that doesn't look good at all. But then it's a division team. You see them all the time. And after what happened in 2019 with Tampa, how can I ever count out what could happen in the playoffs?
The one thing I really feel strongly about is it's totally different, okay? Because number one, in the regular season, like you guys are going, as we sit here now, I was looking at your schedule. You guys are in the weirdest part of your schedule. Like Toronto, Carolina, it's a brutal back-to-back. And then you're traveling a couple different places. In the playoffs, it's 4 out of 7 against the same team. So it's not like, oh, we're preparing for Toronto tonight. We're preparing for Carolina tomorrow, back to back. Then we've got a day off, and then wherever we're going. Like you're all over the place. No. Now it's one team. It's an easier travel schedule. You know wherever you're playing is going to be a short flight from Columbus, most likely. So you can sit there and say, we're going to prepare for the strengths and weaknesses of this team. So on one level, I think it's easier. Where it changes is, like, you cannot play 82 games in the regular season like you play 28 in the playoffs. Everybody says the officiating changes in the playoffs. I don't agree with that. I think the players change in the playoffs. Like, they will do things to each other in the playoffs that they will not do to each other in the regular season. So I think that it's harder hockey, but it's easier to prepare for hockey. And you know what? If you guys played Washington, like Dubois against the Blue Jackets, like, you know, you laugh, but it's going to be personal. It's going to be personal for him. It's going to be personal for the Blue Jackets. And you know what it's going to be like for the Blue Jackets fans in that building. So already you've got so much on the line because you're trying to play to win the Stanley Cup. But now you've got this one person here who he wants to beat you so badly, and you guys want to beat him so badly. Like, the playoffs are another level, man. Nothing surprises me anymore in the playoffs. Like, if you were 8 and they were 1, like, I don't believe in upsets in the playoffs. I really don't. Like, if you beat Washington, I would say, I get it. That's what happens.
I only laugh because, like a true writer, that's right where you went. Where's the story within the story, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we'd all be watching it. You know, we'd all be sitting there. It's like, all you want is, like, everybody in Ohio is in a great mood today because Ohio State won the national championship. And, you know, could you imagine if in a year where Ohio State makes the national championship, the Blue Jackets get in the playoffs and they play a team like Washington where there's a rival? Like, I mean, imagine what your building would be like. You wouldn't even be able to hear the cannon.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Hey, before I let you go, 32 Thoughts, the podcast, you and Bukauskas do a great job.
Yeah.
I mean, it is must listen, I know, for me and for most everybody in my business, and obviously for the hockey fans as well. I mean, it's thorough, it's entertaining, and I really appreciate the work you put into it.
Well, Kyle's great. You know, like, sometimes you got to make changes you don't expect to make, but Kyle's done an unbelievable job, and I'd rather have his future than mine. I'll tell you that much.
Elliotte, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Great to see you. Thanks for doing this, and hope to see you down the road.
My pleasure, Bob, and hello and goodbye to all the great hockey fans in Blue Jackets Nation.
A lot of great information there from Elliotte Friedman, not only about the Blue Jackets, but about the league. And there's going to be a lot coming up as we get closer to the Four Nations tournament and, of course, the trade deadline, which is going to be on March the 7th. Now, the Blue Jackets are getting set to head back out on the road. Yeah, a lot of road trips recently for the Blue Jackets. But this one is going to take them somewhere that they have never been before. It all starts on Thursday when the Blue Jackets play in Vegas against the Golden Knights. They've been there, of course, but the next night they're going to go to Salt Lake City for the first time ever and take on the Utah Hockey Club. After that, the Blue Jackets move on to Dallas for a Sunday game and then finish the road trip in Buffalo. I don't know who puts these things together, Dallas to Buffalo, but that's the trip. Another 4-game road trip for the Blue Jackets before they finally come back home. And when they do, the Utah Hockey Club will be at Nationwide Arena. Again, it is going to be the first time ever, and that's a game that is going to be played on February the 6th. That's a Thursday night, February the 6th, the Blue Jackets and the Utah Hockey Club. So if you would like to be there for that game, and I hope you do, you can get your tickets by going to BlueJackets.com. Thanks for joining me for another edition of CBJ in 30. It's been presented by Pedialyte. I'm Bob McElligott. So long.